Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. So we will continue our discussion on economy. We are in the module budget. Okay. So far we have completed 4 sessions. We have started off with what is budget and we have discussed about the structure of budget, and I've told you it is having 2 aspects or 2 parts, receipts and expenditure. And receipts are further divided into revenue receipts and capital receipts. I have told you the difference between revenue and capital. Okay. Similarly, expenditure also, revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. I have told you what are the components which are coming in revenue receipts and revenue expenditure, capital receipts and capital expenditure. How to understand capital, what is the difference? If there is anything to do with assets and liability, is there any change in assets and liability, then it will be part of capital. If it is expenditure, that will be capital expenditure. Like if you are spending something for creation of infrastructure, so there is an asset creation, okay, that expenditure will be capital expenditure. If you are borrowing from some institutions, okay, that will be a liability. So liability is increasing and you are receiving, when you are borrowing you are receiving, so that is a capital receipts because there is a liability. Okay, so this is what we have done. I have told you what all the various things which will come under these heads. Then we have discussed about various budgetary deficits. We have started off with budget deficit. Then we have discussed about fiscal deficit. Budget deficit as a concept is not using now. So then we have discussed about fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is nothing but the borrowings of the government. Okay. So fiscal deficit is actually the total expenditure minus together revenue receipts plus non-debt creating capital assets. Okay, so that we have done. It is nothing but the borrowing. It is nothing but the liabilities of the government over the period of 1 year. And I've told you it's a flow concept. It is measured over a period of time. Okay. On the other hand, debt is a stock concept which is measured at a point of time. So debt on this particular date, what is a debt on government? Okay, that is a stock concept. There is a flow concept, like it is measured over the period of 1 year. Then we have discussed about revenue deficit. Easy, it is nothing but revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Then we have discussed about effective revenue deficit, because revenue deficit is all about revenue, right? Revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. But if you see some of the grants which are given to states, that will come under revenue expenditure. Okay, grants given to states which will come under revenue expenditure. So, you know, when you calculate revenue deficit, those grants will be part of this revenue deficit calculation. But after getting those grants, if the state is using that grants for creating some infrastructure, some assets, then that grant actually led to creation of assets by the states. So the grants given to states, if the state using that grants to create some assets, then there is a capital creation, right? There is an asset creation. So it is actually a capital expenditure. So it cannot be part of revenue deficit. So what you will do is, if the state used that grants to create asset, then effective revenue deficit means the revenue deficit that you have measured, in that this grants is also incorporated, you subtract that grants. Okay, so the grants to states, not all grants to states, the grants to states which is used for creating assets, So if there is a change in assets, if it is an increase in assets, that could be subtracted because that is a capital expenditure. That should not be coming under revenue deficit. Okay, so I hope you understood. Then we have also talked about primary deficit. What is primary deficit? Primary deficit is nothing but, the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments. And I've told you the reason why we are using this concept. It is basically to ensure intergenerational equity. Because if you see fiscal deficit, there is an obligation under FRBMA Act that you have to reduce the fiscal deficit. There should not be fiscal deficit. All these are there for revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit. Also, all these restrictions are there. But when it comes to fiscal deficit, it's all about borrowings, right? Now, this interest payments means you are paying interest upon the previous borrowings. So if a new government is coming now, let's suppose this year a new government is coming. Okay, this year to next 5 years a new government is coming, and previous government might have borrowed a lot. So this new government is paying, okay, from their fiscal FRBM obligations. So that will actually affect the new government's FRBM obligation, and they cannot spend too much on developmental expenditure. Okay, so basically you need to exclude those interest payments. Then you can see primary deficit. Okay, so I hope you understood. Primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payment. This is basically to ensure that intergenerational equity. The borrowings of the previous government should not affect the FRBM obligations of the existing government. Okay, otherwise it will be a big problem. They cannot go for developmental expenditure. They have to cut down the developmental expenditure. So that we have done of various deficits, and then we have discussed about public expenditure. We have seen different types of expenditure like planned expenditure, non-planned expenditure, revenue expenditure, capital expenditure, all these different developmental expenditure, non-developmental expenditure, all these things we have done. And I've told you now there is no distinction between planned and non-planned expenditure. That was done away with. Okay, then we have also talked about public debt. Okay, so public debt we have discussed. In that we have discussed about three components, out of which internal debt is the maximum. It's around 40% of GDP, 37-38% of GDP. So we have seen internal debt. Okay, here, somewhere here. Internal debt is around 37% of GDP, right? There's nothing but the market borrowing, sale of government securities, etc. Then we have seen other liabilities like from the public account, the post office, deposits, etc. Okay, so other liabilities. Then we have seen the external debt, the third component, that's around 1.5% of GDP. See, this 1.5% of GDP is the external debt. Okay, so out of public debt all these will come. So out of the total debt, if you see, close to 75% is, this is around 49% now. So you can see here this is 10.5%. So total 49% of GDP, right? So if you see, this is 49% of GDP. Now if you see this total debt, which one is maximum? Internal debt is maximum. That's around 75%, right? Because this will be doubled. So that is around 75%. This will be around 22%, and this will be around 3%. Like that it will go. Okay, so external debt is the minimum. But if you see external debt, last year it was $521 billion, which was so high it's close to 20% of GDP. Why it is 20%? Because this external debt include private debt as well as government debt. Okay, so private as well as government, and we have just talked about government debt now. Okay, which is very less. So private debt is around 80%. So in external debt, whose contribution is maximum? Private contribution is maximum, and this question was asked in 2019 prelims. So private contribution is maximum. This is around 20. Okay, so now out of this 521 billion, what is our forex? Our forex is around $450. Okay, $450 billion. So approximately 75% of the external debt we can manage through forex, but still our external debt is so high, mainly because of private borrowings, this external commercial borrowings and all other liabilities. So this is what we have done so far. In this session we are going to discuss the most important topic, that is fiscal reforms. Okay, fiscal reforms. So in this we basically are going to talk about, as I've told you much before, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. We'll see various provisions also. So fiscal responsibility and Budget Management Act, FRBMA. Now from here onwards I'll talk about FRBMA only. I won't use this complete Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management. FRBMA 2003, and it was effective from 2004 onwards. Okay, so let's quickly look into the objectives. These are easy things. Okay, then we will see the main provisions of FRBMA. So objectives. So first and most important is fiscal discipline. Okay, so fiscal discipline, or you can say fiscal responsibility. Okay, so to make sure that the governments are responsible upon their fiscal policies. So fiscal responsibility or fiscal consolidation, all these ways you can say the same. Fiscal discipline or fiscal consolidation, all are the same. So first and most important objective is to promote, to ensure the fiscal discipline. Okay, so how it ensure fiscal discipline? Basically it impose ceilings through ceilings upon government borrowings and various budgetary deficits. So there are different ceilings for fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit has to be reduced by 3% by the year 2008. Revenue deficit has to be eliminated to 0% by 2009. Effective revenue deficit, primary deficit, various ceilings are there on various budgetary deficit. I'll come to the ceilings when we discuss about the provisions of this act. Okay, so now understand the fiscal discipline are going to be ensured through various ceilings upon different budgetary deficits. Okay, so to ensure transparency in budgeting processes, so to ensure transparency. See, this I am saying just for the sake of you getting some contents for writing the introduction, that initial part of your answer. Before you jump into the actual act, you need to write what is the objective. So you can write 2-3 lines. If you're an expert, you can skip this area. I'm talking this for the newcomers. Okay, so transparency in budgetary process, and then intergenerational equity in fiscal management, to ensure intergenerational equity. Just before, I've told you how it is ensuring intergenerational equity, because I've told you the previous government's borrowing should not affect the future governments, right? So in their FRBM obligation, the previous borrowing should not be affected. So intergenerational equity. So if you borrow more, fiscal deficit is nothing but borrowings or liabilities. If your fiscal deficit is high, that shows borrowings are so high. So if your borrowings are so high, your interest burden will be so high. So it will actually affect the future generation. Okay, so that should be tackled. So you manage your fiscal policies. So for that you need to have a proper fiscal discipline, and that is the most important objective of this act. So all these are transparency, intergenerational equity. Apart from that, remove various fiscal impediments. Okay, to remove various fiscal impediments in effective conduct of monetary policy. See, when we discussed about monetary policy, I have discussed this point, that monetary policy are actually used by the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, to control inflation, okay, and to promote growth. So if inflation is there, if in a situation where inflation is so high, let me show here, if inflation is high, what is the reason for this inflation? It is because of demand. So if because of demand, why demand is there? Because people having purchasing power. Now, why purchasing power is there? Because enough money supply is there in the market. So what is the solution? The solution is to reduce purchasing power, right? This is the solution. How to reduce purchasing power? Reduce money supply. How to reduce money supply? Suck out the money from the market. Okay, so what RBI will do? RBI will increase the interest rates. So the cost of fund or money will be more, so that you won't borrow. So money in the market will come down when you increase the interest rates. So RBI will increase SLR, the reserve requirements, CRR will increase, because if you increase SLR and CRR, this will affect the bank's lending capacity. So lending capacity is affecting means you have less money to lend. So it will reduce the credit creation capacity. That will reduce the money supply. So increasing reserve requirements will reduce the money supply. Also increasing the interest rates, like bank rate will increase, the repo rate will increase. Okay, then reverse repo will increase. Okay, MSF will increase. All these interest rates will increase. So what I want to tell you is, in monetary policy, RBI will increase all the interest rates and the reserve requirements. The idea is to reduce the money supply. But will this be enough? It will be enough only if government also support or complement with proper fiscal discipline. If government is spending too much, then what will happen? Even though RBI is taking all these measures to control the money supply, the money is pumped in the market. So actually money supply keep on increasing. There is no use for doing all these things by the RBI. So that's this point. Remove all fiscal impediments to effective conduct of monetary policy. Just understand, if the monetary policy need to be effective, the fiscal policy has to be complementing, or both have to be complementing each other. Both have to be hand in hand. Otherwise, if a tight monetary policy but a very liberal fiscal policy, you can't achieve the objective and you can't control the inflation. So when you do this, what will happen? If you do this, purchasing power will come down, aggregate demand will come down. Okay, then inflation will come down. Okay, so I hope you understood. And next, one more objective, basically to conduct fiscal policy in a medium term framework. Okay, to conduct fiscal policy in a medium term framework. Okay, so 3 documents are published. What are the 3 documents? Medium term fiscal policy statement, medium term fiscal policy statement, okay, fiscal policy strategy statement, fiscal policy strategy statement, okay, macroeconomic framework statement, macroeconomic framework statement. So this can be asked in prelims, so have an idea of this. So these are the objectives. Now let's look into the targets. What are the targets under this? So first one is obviously fiscal deficit. So as I have told you, fiscal deficit has to be reduced to 3%, less than or equal to 3%, or it has to be, it should not be more than 3%. So less than or equal to 3% of GDP by 2008. Okay, revenue deficit should be 0 by 2009. I've told you revenue deficit is the worst deficit, because if there is a revenue deficit, that is basically day-to-day expenditure, the current consumption expenditure of the government. If revenue deficit is there, means there is no asset creation, obviously, because it is revenue deficit, it is for current consumption expenditure, day-to-day expenditure. And if that is deficit, if the revenue receipts cannot meet the revenue expenditure, how to meet that? You will have to sell your assets. So the revenue deficit actually shows that you are selling your assets and you are losing your assets. So that is the worst deficit ever. So revenue deficit has to be reduced by 2009, and for that I have told you what are the effective management tools that you can do, proper tax reforms, etc. We have discussed in detail, so I'm not getting into that here. I'm only confined to FRBM Act. Okay, so if you missed out those videos, all the videos are available in the Telegram channel. Join the Telegram channel or get in touch with me in this Instagram ID. Okay, so this second one, revenue deficit. Then third one, we have also discussed about monetized deficit, and there should not be monetized deficit. No monetized deficit. That means RBI should not print currency. Monetized deficit means deficit financing. I have told you 3 components of monetary deficit, monetized deficit, out of which the most important one is deficit financing, which is nothing but printing of currency. I have told you what are the impact of printing in currency. It's a kind of inflation tax. It will increase the prices of commodity. It will not create resources. It will only transfer resources from the private to public. I've shown you enough examples for that. So monetized deficit should not be there. That means government cannot borrow from RBI. Government borrowing from RBI means what? Simply RBI is printing currency and giving it to the government. That will increase money supply. That will increase inflation. Government cannot borrow from RBI. That doesn't mean that government cannot borrow. Government can borrow through RBI from others, but not directly from RBI. Okay, so because government's debt is actually managed by RBI, that also we have discussed, and we have also discussed about, I've talked about Public Debt Management Authority, which was planned but it was dropped later in one of our lecture before, monetary system, I think. So now there are 3 amendments. Okay, now there are 3 amendments. After that, I've told you before one more concept, that is effective revenue deficit. So making revenue deficit is slightly difficult because it is all about day-to-day expenditure. Okay, reducing fiscal deficit may be easy because you can reduce the capital expenditure. That you can reduce, but you can't do anything with revenue expenditure. So since it was slightly difficult, government come up with this effective revenue deficit. I've told you what is that. Revenue deficit minus those grants which is given to states, which is actually used for creation of capital. That means assets, right? So effective revenue deficit should be 0. Okay, so that is the amendment. Now there was a committee to review FRBMA. So committee to review FRBMA, so established in 2016, and the report was in 2017. Chairman was N.K. Singh. Okay, so basically the committee was asked to study feasibility of having fiscal deficit range instead of fixed targets. So feasibility of having fiscal deficit range instead of fixed targets. What is the advantage of having a range? Let's say I'm saying 2 to 3% or 2 to 4%. It is very easy rather than having a fixed percentage like 3.5% or 4% or 3%. So a range will be always better. So this committee was asked to recommend or study the feasibility of having fiscal deficit range instead of fixed targets. Okay. Then there was an expenditure management commission. Before also I have mentioned about this expenditure management commission. When we talked about plan and non-plan expenditure, I've told you this distinction was abolished. At that time I've talked about Bimal Jalan committee. So this is the chairman was Dr. Bimal Jalan. So report was in 2015. Now we'll see the recommendations. Expenditure on general administration to be reduced, and I've told you various austerity measures have been taken. Instead of first class travel, go for economy travel. Okay, then meetings, 5-star meetings should be reduced. Okay, normal meetings to be conducted, and all these austerity measures. So we have already done that. Okay, expenditure on general administration to be reduced. Okay, then centrally sponsored schemes to be rationalized is also accepted. I hope you know the difference between centrally sponsored scheme and central sector scheme. Watch the previous video. Okay, then third one, all subsidies and welfare payments to be replaced by DBT. So DBT instead of all subsidies and welfare payments. Then abolish plan and non-plan expenditure, that we have already discussed. Abolish plan and non-plan expenditure. What is the logic? Because this distinction is arbitrary, right? See, it is not necessary that all planned expenditure are developmental in nature. Similarly, there can be developmental aspects in non-planned also. For example, as part of planned expenditure, you may start a school, but the salaries, everything will come under non-planned expenditure, right? Most of the revenue receipts expenditures are non-planned expenditure. So you just create schools, that doesn't mean that promote development. You need to pay the salaries, right? So that is coming under non-planned. So there is this classification or this distinction is arbitrary. So that's the reason why it was abolished. Okay. So then government may consider shifting from cash based accounting to accrual based accounting or budgeting. Okay, see what do you mean by this accrual based budgeting? Here the transactions are recorded when they happen rather than when the payment is made. See, let's suppose this transaction is in March. Okay, March, and the payment is actually made in April. So if you go for this cash based accounting, what will happen? This payment which is made in April will come in the next year budget. Okay, not in this year. So if the transaction happened in March and if you go for accrual based, it will be reflected in this year. So that is what we mean by accrual based budgeting. Okay, because this is part of next financial year. So actually government will get some time to manage this if you go with this. That's why cash based accounting, but it should not be that. As and when the transaction happen, it should be reflected. Okay. The next recommendation, post offices to be developed as payment banks to facilitate the implementation of DBT, direct benefit transfer. Okay, so post office to be transferred as or developed as payment banks to implement. I'm not writing it completely, I'm just saying, so I'm writing the keywords so that you can complete your notes. Okay, so post offices to be developed as payment banks to implement DBT completely. So DBT was started in which year? These are subsidies are given to firms, right? It's a grants given to firms. Grants given to firms, but who will benefit? The customers or the consumers will benefit. Just like taxes, indirect taxes which are imposed on firms, but consumers have to pay. Just like that, subsidies are given to firms, but consumers are getting benefit. So DBT was given from 2013 for LPG subsidy. Like slogan was "Aapka paisa, aapka haath." Okay, the first it was direct cash transfer. It was DCT, direct cash transfer. Now it was changed to direct benefit transfer. Both are same, but this is basically to see if you are saying direct cash transfer, it's a kind of something given for free. So direct benefit, that word is changed, but both are actually same. Okay, what are the benefits of this? Benefits: it eliminate leakages, middlemen, eliminate leakages like middlemen, duplication of cards, etc. Okay, mistargeting will decrease mistargeting. So I just want to give you some points so that you can write in your answer. That's why I'm writing it. All these are simple points. Okay, so mistargeting, then transparency. Okay, transparency will increase. Delay will decrease. It will also reduce the cost of administration. Reduce cost of administration. Then reduce black marketing. Consumer choice will increase. Now you're getting money, you can spend the way you want. Okay, so consumer choice will increase. That also lead to financial inclusion. Financial inclusion, because you're starting a bank account and you're getting the benefits through the bank account, that leads to financial inclusion. So it also decrease cost of administration. Okay, see, if you remember FCI, I have told you when we discussed in agriculture chapter, the economic cost of FCI is sometimes higher than market price. Why? It is because of the administration's inefficiency. So that can be reduced here, because see, FCI cost is like 17 per kg. Okay, market price is like 16 kg. So what you can do, you can transfer the 16 kg, that is a market price. FCI, if they need to maintain, their economic cost is coming around 17 per kg. So this could be avoided. Okay, so here you can actually save. I hope you understood. Then decrease public expenditure. It will decrease public expenditure. So I hope you understood the session. If you have any doubt, you can get in touch with me here. This is my Instagram ID, and don't forget to join the Telegram channel so that you'll get all my videos there. Okay, so see you guys. Thank you.